Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into something you probably see all the time, but maybe don't think too much about. Copper. Yeah, this super ancient metal, one that humans have used for literally thousands of years, is suddenly making all these modern headlines. And it's for some really fascinating reasons, connecting everything from our diet to our overall health.
I mean, you've probably seen this kind of thing online, right? Especially when it comes to copper jewelry. This whole idea that copper has these, healing and anti-inflammatory powers. It's a huge claim. And honestly, it's the perfect jumping off point for us to really dig into the science behind this incredible element.
So let's talk about those copper bracelets. People have been wearing them for centuries, passing down the belief that they help with things like joint and muscle comfort. It's a tradition steeped in history and a ton of personal stories. But you gotta wonder, right? Is there something more to copper than just being a piece of jewelry?
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the whole allure of copper jewelry. Then we'll get into what it actually does for our health and the dangers of not getting enough. We'll ask a big question. Is our diet actually lacking copper? After that, we'll uncover a kind of hidden superpower it has. And we'll wrap it all up by looking at why copper is still such an element of intrigue. Okay, so let's shift gears a little. We're going to move away from the jewelry claims for a second and dive into the hard science of what copper does inside our bodies. Because, spoiler alert, it's way more than just a shiny metal.
So the science is really clear on this. Copper isn't just for plumbing or making pennies. It's actually an essential mineral. That means our bodies absolutely need it to work properly. We're talking about our most critical systems here, our immune function, our heart, our bones, even our nervous system.
And it's not like we need a ton of it. Your body actually has a pretty specific amount, somewhere between 1.4 and 2.1 milligrams for every kilogram you weigh. It sounds like a tiny amount, right? But believe me, its impact is absolutely massive. So that's the big question, isn't it? If this little mineral is so critical, what happens when those levels start to drop? What are the consequences?
And that's where we get into the science of copper deficiency. Because, there's a growing mountain of research that's linking low copper levels to some really significant health issues. And we're not talking about minor problems here. The consequences can be really serious. Studies have found connections between low copper and a higher risk of things like heart disease, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, even osteoporosis. It's a pretty powerful reminder of just how important this one little trace mineral is.
And this isn't just a correlation. The connection can be really direct. For example, some studies found that when patients with low levels were given copper supplements, they saw real, measurable improvements. We're talking about decreases in total cholesterol and triglycerides. Another study even showed it helped lower both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. That's the top and bottom numbers you see, right? The pressure when your heart beats and when it's resting.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty serious. But is it something we actually need to worry about? Like, how common is it for people, especially in Western countries, to actually be low in copper?
Well, what the research shows is pretty surprising. This isn't some new fad or a recent problem. The data shows that the amount of copper in the average Western diet has been going down, steadily, for almost 100 years. We're talking since the 1930s.
And the scale of this today is kind of staggering. Get this, in the EU and the UK, it's estimated that half of all adults are getting less copper than they should. And in the US and Canada, it's still a huge number, about 1 in every 4 adults.
So why is this happening? Well, it pretty much comes down to our changing diets. We're eating a lot more processed foods, and those just don't have the same mineral content. Plus, the foods that are really packed with copper, things like shellfish or beef liver, aren't exactly staples in most Western diets anymore. Okay, so the story of what copper does inside our bodies is already pretty fascinating. But there is a completely different side to this element that is just as cool. Let's switch gears and look at what copper can do on the outside. For thousands of years, people have known that there's something special about copper. We're talking over 4,000 years ago, ancient civilizations were using it to purify water and to help heal wounds. And this was way, way before we knew anything about germs or microbes. They just knew it worked. So how does it actually do that? Well, modern science has figured it out. It turns out copper surfaces are actively hostile to microbes. They release these charged particles, copper ions, that literally bust into the cells of bacteria and viruses, damaging them until they can't function anymore. It's like a microscopic war zone, and copper is a super effective weapon.
And this isn't just ancient history. Let's look at a really dramatic modern example. A study back in 2020 looked at how long the virus that causes COVID-19 could survive on different surfaces. On something like stainless steel, they found it could hang around for up to 72 hours.
But on copper, whoa, the results were just astounding. In just 2 hours, 2 hours, an incredible 96% of the virus was completely inactivated.
And if you wait 5 hours, that number jumps to 99.2%. The study basically concluded that copper surfaces can just decimate the virus's lifespan. It's an amazing showcase of its power in a scenario we all know too well.
So, you see what's happening here? We have these two completely different but equally powerful stories about copper. On one hand, it's this essential nutrient we absolutely need inside our bodies, and on the other, it's this incredibly powerful protective surface on the outside.
This is really the dual nature of copper. Internally, it's a crucial building block for our health. Externally, it's a fierce defender against germs. And the coolest part, both of these roles are completely backed up by solid scientific research.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with those copper bracelets. We know for a fact that copper is vital in our diet, and we know it's a powerhouse at destroying microbes on surfaces. So it leaves us with this one really fascinating question. Can wearing this protective metal on the outside actually have an impact on the essential mineral we need on the inside? It's that question that keeps this ancient metal right at the cutting edge of science today.